Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Doug.
So, first and foremost, before we go any further, what is your official title and kind of what do you do?
It's a weird title, Chief Product Design Architect. So, I kind of oversee product design in a certain way, and then I'm also acting product manager for Helix Stadium hardware, Helix hardware, HX hardware, things like that. Um, and then I kind of dabble in some other stuff too. Lately, I've been doing way too much marketing. I just want to sit in my office and design stuff. That's all I want to do. But then I get pulled in a million different directions. But everybody at Line 6 does. So my buddy Brandon Frenzel did all of the graphics for Focus View, but he's also coding and he's doing like packaging. So we all kind of wear a million hats.
I love that. So, I have so many questions, but the first question I've got, if there's one, what is your single favorite feature about Stadium?
Well, I have to say Showcase because that's my baby. So I don't know if anybody else is going to care about it. It's something that I haven't shut up about for 15 years. I just had my 15th anniversary at Line 6 last month. And I'll babble about Showcase to anybody who will listen. And it's taken 15 years for me to convince people to actually make it happen. And now it's finally happened. So yes, that's my favorite.
Okay, well, I'm going to take that opening and march right in. So, one of the questions people have asked, because there's a bunch of Variax fanatics,
Mhm.
PowerCab fanatics, and
Yep.
Looper fanatics.
Okay.
So, Showcase is intended to really be a playback scenario versus a DAW. But the looper folks are wondering, hey, are we going to get more than the 60 seconds of loop time? And how does a looper potentially interact inside the whole playback in terms of Showcase?
So yeah. So I think I can say, I don't quote me here, but I think Stadium is going to, when first available, have twice the memory of Helix Floor. That will expand for sure. We do have plans for the Looper. Um, we have some kind of cool, unique spins on it here and there. The when it comes to Showcase is really simple when it comes to the looper. So currently in Helix products, you can go to the command center and you can take all of the looper functions from the six switch looper and you can map them to any foot switch you want. So they're sort of these disembodied commands that talk to this looper that's over here, and it's not mapped specifically to a foot switch. So if you were to imagine those commands can then be freely mapped to a timeline instead of kind of geographically on a foot switch layout, that's sort of how it works. And because they can be mapped to specific sections of the song, you can automate those looper functions. So you could have it record at a certain point, stop at a certain point, then play back that loop at a certain point. You could have it go up an octave at a certain point, down an octave, flip backwards. Any of the things that you would normally control a looper from your feet, you can then now map that to a timeline so you don't have to use your feet at all. At least that's 1.0-ish, 1.1-ish. So there's definitely stuff coming in the future as well, but that's all we can really talk about right now.
SD card, will you be able to export your loops?
Yeah. I don't know when, but yeah, I mean, so DL4 Mark II, I'm gonna get in so much trouble. You're gonna get me in so much trouble, Doug. DL4 Mark II was acting as a test platform for Stadium's Looper. So DL4 Mark II is a flash-based looper, and it does actually store the loop when you turn it off and turn it back on. But there are a lot of products that are test platformed for Stadium. So, for example, HX1 is also a test platform because of the OLED display. We wanted to make sure that there weren't burn-in issues and that sort of stuff. And we knew there wasn't because we went through stringent guidelines, but just to make sure, hey, let's check visibility, let's get it in hardware, let's see how it looks. And so if somebody were to look very closely at a lot of our recent products, they might go, "Oh, wait a second, they're doing that. I wonder what that might mean for Helix Stadium." And an enterprising sleuth might be able to figure out what we're working on.
Awesome. One of the comments was that the expression has lost its LCD feedback screen. So I take it there's going to be a way to get that feedback on now on the touch screen.
Yeah, we have a plan for that. Maybe not right away. It was one of those things that It was those OLEDs are really expensive. Scribble strips are really expensive. It's extra power that doesn't need to be there. It would have actually increased the depth perhaps a little bit. And so like it just make it really cleaner by putting two colored LEDs up there. So yeah, it could be very easily that you move the expression pedal and a little thing pops up, and then when you stop moving it, it disappears. So we haven't really mapped that out yet, but absolutely that's doable.
You know, it's interesting. So many of the questions were very clearly experience born, but also user process, right? So, like, I basically have two modes: the expression pedal with the volumes all the way down,
Yep.
or it's all the way up.
Yeah.
It's on or
Yeah.
off, or I'm swelling, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not using that visual feedback, but pretty clearly the person that asked that question is like they're riding that thing, looking at what number it's at, and they have all these things set. So I thought that was very exciting. All right.
I get it. I get it. I'm with them.
Foot switch distance. This was another great
Yep.
question. I'm going to guess that because the expression pedal's not as wide, you were able to keep the spacing between the foot switches the same. Because one of the things you talked about was continuing as much of the user experience from O.G Helix into Stadium. Is the distance the same or is it different?
No, it is slightly tighter. We spent a lot of time. So when we first start designing products, we'll actually print them out on paper, full size. We have the full size printers, and we'll print them out on paper. I run around the building and I show everybody stuff. And I go, "Hey, does this bother you? Is there any problem? How do you feel about this?" And then you get an okay, and that takes it to the next step. And then Dale might do a foam core mock-up of it, where we'll actually put real switches in the foam core at the right distances. We'll run around the building again. It's like, all right, how is everybody fine with? Are we cool with this? Are we good? And we'll continue to do fancier and fancier mock-ups. The spacing from the center of one switch to the other center of the switch is 70 millimeters on Helix and Helix LT. It's 67 millimeters on Podgo Wireless, HX Stomp, and HX Stomp XL. And Stadium is the same. So Stadium has the exact same switch spacing as everything but Helix and Helix LT, but the spacing is literally 3.9% tighter. And we tested it extensively to ensure that that wasn't going to be a problem for people. So
That's awesome. So there's a lot of talk about like the JCM down the hall and one of the questions was, and you may not be able to answer this, but I was like, oh, I'd love to know what was that first wolf model being played through, right? The wolf mother.
oh, the computer. Yeah. I don't remember because so we started Agora years ago. So I don't remember. It was probably not the real cab. It was probably studio monitors of some type, but they were probably bigger, so they might have been Focals or Adams or Ben Hasmaki's. I don't remember, honestly.
Another great
Sorry,
question.
Doug.
No. This is awesome. I mean, I was as excited about the questions that people had as they have because there's so much great in the headspace of the community. What a great community, first of all. Everybody's super
Yeah.
excited and super cool. If you can talk about it,
Mhm.
what sort of different monitoring situations do you guys use, like FRFR, using a power amp and a real cabinet, studio monitors to kind of beta test stuff to see how it translates through, studio monitors, an actual 412 cabinet, PowerCab. I mean, there's a lot of places this stuff's going to get played back in your monitors.
Mhm.
Can you talk about how you guys kind of make sure that stuff is the way you want it to be and that it translates?
Yeah, I mean, during the modeling process, the amps are connected to a matching cab in real time, so they're always being loaded by the proper cab. So we're constantly hearing that, but it's typically in another room, so we don't blow our eardrums when we're doing that sort of stuff. When we're dialing things in, and this is typically sound design's expertise, so I don't want to speak for them necessarily, but they'll use power cabs, they'll use PA speakers, they'll use FRFRs, they'll use studio monitors. The kind of the brunt day-to-day work is generally done on studio monitors just because you don't want to have to constantly switch back and forth all the time throughout the entire process. Sometimes if there's a problem, like, well, that's a little weird, I might be hearing something a little bit bizarre. Let me check a different playback system. But it's also important uh, to front end all of that work with different sources as well. So You want to make sure that you have like a Les Paul type guitar, that you have a like a loud 7 string with like super loud pickups, that you have a passive telly, that you have a Strat, obviously. Um, and you know, you want to make sure that you have a handful of basses as well, an acoustic. You want to make sure that you just want to have a sanity check and make sure that everything sounds good with any instrument that you could plug into it.
I love that. Another great question, latency. Now, I want to preface this because there are people who experience different types of latency.
Yep.
You could be playing through a regular guitar amp, mic'd up, going into a digital PA, and by the time the sound gets back to your ears, there's the latency. So for anybody who doesn't know the definition, basically you hit the strings and a sound comes back to you noticeably late, hence the term latency, between what you're playing and what you're hearing. So the question essentially was, is there increased or decreased latency between O.G Helix and Stadium?
So it depends on what we're trying to accomplish. We don't quite know yet. The current goal is to make sure that we can match it. From what I understand, we are currently besting most of the competition out there. Latency is kind of a sticking point for me personally. Um, because I spend way too much money on my audio interfaces and analog summing and all this stuff to make sure that I can actually use, you know, Helix Native as my tone. And so throughput latency on my DAW is super big, and so clearly it needs to be awesome on our hardware as well. One interesting side note is that Nexus, any peripherals that we might connect via that Cat6 connector, we're thinking about being able to daisy chain up to 3 devices at this point, at which point the entire latency hit from the entire network of Nexus peripherals going in all the way to the end and all the way back is 2 samples, which is almost nothing. And like right now, Helix is at 1.8 milliseconds. HX Stomp is at 1.2 milliseconds. And 1.2 milliseconds is literally the same latency you would get by stepping 14 inches farther away from your amp. So I've recorded a lot of people in a lot of studios. Vocalists are certainly the most sensitive to latency. I've worked with vocalists who can sense 5 milliseconds. I've been in the studio, as you have, with Steve Vai. Steve Vai has magic, crazy ears. If I had to guess, I could say he might be able to sense 3, 4 milliseconds. I don't know. Almost nobody else can. The trick with latency is if you start using a lot of effects loops, or if you're running into a bunch of like external pedals that are also digital pedals, you can incur extra latency. So collectively, that stuff starts going up. So once your average guitarist starts hitting 9, 10, 11, 12 milliseconds, it starts to become noticeable. And depending on your ears and your experience, that can start to maybe affect your playing. So those are the things you want to avoid. And there's some tricks that you can do, like if you do have an external pedal and use it in effects loop, never use the mix knob on the pedal. Use the mix knob in the effects loop block, because then if you turn down the mix from 100%, the dry signal is going all the way through all the time. So there is no incurred latency on the dry signal. It would only be on the wet signal coming in. And if it's a time-based effect like delay or reverb, if it's a few milliseconds late, it doesn't matter. You're never going to be able to tell. It's that initial attack of the dry signal that affects you. In addition, on external pedals, if you can, try to get pedals that have what's known as a dry through. So, you know, a lot of like Strymons and Marises and Empresses, they all have this. DL4 Mark II has this as well, where the signal that's going through is completely dry. It's all analog. It doesn't actually go through an A to D and D to A converter. And then the wet signal, the delayed or reverb signal that's coming back in, then gets added in. Yes, slightly at a slight latency, but you don't notice because it's like kind of all mushed out as just hearing the reverb trails and the delay repeats. So there are a bunch of little tricks you can do to minimize latency as well. But as far as Helix Stadium goes, we're right there with Helix and other boxes. So
Spillover.
not at launch. So
Okay.
so so Helix right now, Helix LT, Helix Rack have this really cool thing where if you disable path 2, so you lose half your DSP, you get perfect spillover and not just like, okay, we're just going to smear reverbs across, But if you have a reverb that's 30 seconds long, it's you hear the entire thing because it's actually swapping back and forth between the two DSPs. So we decided we didn't want people to have to sacrifice half their DSP, so we're exploring additional solutions that would get there, but at launch there won't be perfect spillover now. But we still have snapshots. And what's nice is, especially with showcase flags and stuff like that, snapshots will take on a whole new meaning. So, but yes, we are exploring options there.
16 guitar amps, 6 bass amps. What about OG?
Yeah, kind of. That's
Okay, kind of.
We're being very conservative there. So there are 16 guitar amps and 6 bass amps. Well, I'm sorry. There's 16 guitar models, like separate items that you scroll through, and there's 6 bass models that you scroll through. However, for most of the models, we're now embedding multiple channels in each model. So, for example, the 50th anniversary Ampeg SVT has 5 channels built in. And then because it's built into the model, you can assign that channel switching to a switch or to snapshots or to and by extension, a showcase flag. So if you actually count the actual channels, like if you counted models like we count models in Helix right now, there are actually 39 models/channels in 1.0 for Helix Stadium.
And one of the things that we did when I was there with Brian and Bradford, we actually took the normal input and the brilliant input of the AC30, and we panned one to the left and panned to the right, and it was awesome. I mean, just like the 3D quality of it was phenomenal.
Same stuff you do in the studio.
Same stuff you do in the studio, except it was just right there. So how many legacy, because this, I mean, what legacy, quote unquote, OG Helix amp and bass, guitar and bass models are coming in at launch?
All of it. The only thing people are losing, so they're probably little tiny things I just can't remember right now, but the only thing people are losing if they go to Stadium from Helix is they're losing the older hybrid cabs, which don't sound nearly as good as the new cabs. The spillover, which we talked about, which we're going to eventually solve. Pedal edit mode, we're reconfiguring and trying to figure out how to do that better because there aren't enough people that take advantage of it. So there's no point in just bringing it forward if nobody's going to use it in this either. So, and then that's it. So all of the effects, all of the amps are still there. You turn it on, you go into the amp list. The top 16 models are all Aguora, and then it's all the existing stuff. And then it's all the base Aguora amps, and then all the HX bass. And at the end, we do have a legacy category for amps. We haven't talked about this yet. All that is they are the amps that are effective, not replaced, but they have been redone in Aguora. We've now moved them to a legacy category. And we were trying to figure out a better name for legacy because some people are like, oh, that implies that they're old, and technically they are, but like the Bogner Ecstasy was from 3.8. And like the Revs are like super popular, and those are newer amp models, and people say those are some of the best models you guys do. We actually Agoraize them first. And so people are like, well, wait a second, why are all the new models already legacy? You just came out with them. And the answer is, well, we wanted to absolutely make positively sure that Aguora was the madness, right? So if we were to compare them to the first models we did, well, then yeah, it's easy to make Aguora sound better than the earliest models when we're still building the infrastructure and that sort of thing. But if we can notably beat the newest, best HX models that we created, that was really kind of like the proof that Aguora was something special.
I love that. One of the questions was about pedal edit mode, because for those that use it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because there's an extra bank of foot switches, you could literally take some standard functions and apply them to one bank and then basically leave pedal edit mode on 24/7 so you can get in and have that as a second modus operandi, if you will, just because you've got that second layer of switches, yeah?
Oh, you mean the command center switches?
So there's twice as many There's more foot switches, but there's also a second layer.
Mhm.
There's a second layer of foot switches that you can assign functionality to, I guess through Command Center, but also through the touch sensitivity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So on Helix, there's stomp mode and preset mode and snapshot mode. So we have additional modes. We have six foot switch modes in Helix Stadium, and two of them are stomp modes, stomp A and stomp B. And and you can assign whatever two modes you use the most to foot switch six, so you're always toggling between those. And if you want to swap those out, it takes 3 seconds. It's super easy to kind of organize your foot switch modes however you want. All the foot switch shortcuts, like pressing up and down at the same time, will still call up snapshot mode, for example. So if you're used to a certain way of working, that's there. But what's nice about having two stomp modes is you don't it's not just for block on and off. It's also for, hey, I want to have one switch that maybe gooses the gain of this amp up, and maybe it turns down the output level as well, just to make sure you don't necessarily have a volume. So you can have a switch assigned to 8 different parameter changes. I think we upped it to 16. I don't know. But so you can have switches do all sorts of stuff. They can also do command center things. So if you happen to have looper switches that you can assign freely, so you can map looper switches wherever you want, you could then dedicate an entire layer or the stomp B to just command center stuff. So here are my here's preset up and down, bank up and down, snapshot up and down, and four of the looper switches that I always use. And you can then copy and paste that to other presets. And so that's completely independent of your block on and off if you want. So we'll let people organize them however they like.
That's awesome. It's been a minute since I went through the mode, so sorry for looking like an idiot.
No,
So uh, and again, what I love was the questions. I kind of like turn it on to use the same preset and just turn little stomps on and off. I have a very,
Still does that.
for
Yep.
the most part, very basic. It's on. It sounds great. I just need a little bit more gain or a little bit less gain, as you pointed out, to bring the levels up and a little extra drive. But
Yep.
I love the way that people like very clearly the guy that rides the volume pedal. That's so important to him. Okay, PowerCab. So and you may not be able to answer this, but one would go, okay, look, it's been out for a minute. There's some other products in the marketplace, and this is where the question was like treble and bass controls. And I'm thinking, well, Nexus in theory would be the next logical update, so you can do other things with it. If you can answer, is there a refresh coming for PowerCab? How does that fit in terms of what you can talk about with the product line as an ecosystem?
We can't talk about future products that are coming out. Um, PowerCab currently, or PowerCab Plus rather, currently connects via analog, like any other, powered speaker. Also connects via one of these proprietary technology we have called L6 Link, which was originally developed for our stage source mixer and stage source speakers, stage scape mixer, sorry. And it also works with like DT50 and HD 500. Um, and uh, and and then obviously we have VDI on OG Helix. There you go, right? And we have Variax, and I love my Variax. The trick, however, is that both VDI and L6 Link are far too expensive to put on anything but the most expensive products we make. So they're not scalable. So all of the goodness that somebody would have from a Variax, to get the most out of it, you have to buy the best products we make, because there's no way to fit or afford to put something like VDI on HX Stomp, for example. Um, Plus, VDI and L6 Link are one of the two of the most expensive features in Helix right now. It's not just the jack; there's a ton of circuitry in there as well. That's pretty complicated, and so we looked for a solution that could hopefully replace it and then condense them into something that would allow us to still support them, unfortunately, with an external box. But also be able to let us do things in the future that we could never do with VDI or L6 Link. And that's what Nexus is. So the first Nexus peripheral is the Expand D10 that we showed. And so that does bring back VDI and L6 Link, and ADAT light pipe output, which is really cool. So you can connect it to audio interfaces or stage boxes or digital mixers and that sort of thing. But there are all sorts of other cool boxes that could potentially come out. And already we've had a bunch of people saying, hey, could you do a Dante converter? Or could you do 8 microphone input expander? And the answer is technically, yeah. we have to have enough people say, if you make it, we'll buy it. So it's not like because we can, we will, but the fact that people are already feeding us ideas on how to take Nexus to the next step is really exciting.
It's awesome. DT series amps. Are you going to be able to change topography? Is that going to be built into the ecosystem?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. So we are committing to Variax and PowerCab. It really depends on how many DT users come out and say, "Hey, at this point, it might be in the single or double digits." So it really depends. Don't know. I would love to.
So,
Everything we do is always it's this massive list that we have in the software we use, and we're constantly moving things up and down, and they start out as what we call t-shirt sizes. So small is the easiest to implement. Extra large is something that requires many engineers, many weeks to implement. And so we're able to organize things on difficulty, complexity, how many users are going to use it, what percentage of our user base are going to use it. And so that just determines our priority going forward.
how in the world do you track all that stuff?
I don't have to. That's our project managers. Yeah. I mean, so it's a little different for amps and effects. That's much more fluid, much more we're hang out like a party, and we just say, "Hey, did you see that thread on the one forum where they're all raving about this amp? Has anybody played one yet?" Like, "Oh yeah, I have a buddy who has one. Oh, well, hey, let me know what you think. Oh, this is pretty cool. This is different. We're not doing anything like this in Helix. Let's go get one, and that should be the next model." Or, hey, an artist came and said, "Oh, man, I would kill if you could get this in there." And very rarely is there any pushback. Like bands like, "No, Eric, that's stupid. We're not going to model that." Or, "Igor, what are you talking about?" It's all, "Oh yeah, that would be really cool. Let's do that." So it's very, very agreeable here.
That's awesome. Showcase.
Yes.
And by the way, if you need a jet, just kind of give me one of those as like and
Good.
because I
I'm
want to
good.
be
I'm good
respectful
for
of your
like
time.
5:15.
Okay, that's awesome. Let's hope we don't run out of hard drive space. Um, this is so I basically I'm going to look back and I will have had a smile etched into my face because I mean I bought that amp before you worked at Line 6.
Yeah.
So like and by the way, it still flipping sounds great. I've been playing through it for a week. I'm just like, holy cow. So in terms of Showcase, what things do you envision Showcase controlling and in turn being the center point that it allows you to control Showcase and Stadium? What other devices are going to control it? That is to say, obviously lights and PA and projection, but also computers. How do you see the interfacing going on in both directions?
So I mean that's kind of what's cool about Showcase is that kind of like snapshots and sort of like the command center, we can provide suggestions and we can come up with use cases and hookup diagrams and that sort of thing. But what it really is like, hey, here are a bunch of tools. Here's the ability to load in up to 8 stereo files that will spit up MIDI clock. You can set up tempo changes and time signature changes, and you can set up a bunch of events that take place. And what do you want to have happen? And half of those events are internal, which means they control things inside Helix Stadium. Half of them are external, like spitting out QWERTY key commands or MIDI. But what happens when you build sort of that show around the tools is totally up to that person. So the learning curve is really shallow. It's okay, I've figured out how to load in tracks. All right, I know how to mix them from the matrix mixer. I know I can drag these things up and now the parameters are there and I can move them around if I need to fine tune them. All right, so now I know how this works. So now what can I do with it? And now it's just like, well, wait a second, could I do that? Well, wait a second, it does have a MIDI input. Let me look at it. It's like, oh, cool, I can send that. Let me try it. Look at that, it happened. That's awesome. Well, now imagine that happening during your show, and that is what Showcase is. It's just a set of tools that let people put on performances that they normally wouldn't have either bothered to do or they at one point thought was too complicated or too expensive or too sophisticated. Now anybody can kind of put on a stadium level show, in their bedroom or in a dive bar or at the club downtown, or eventually, take it on tour. It's it's a little heady and it's a little interesting, but it's just It's like the command center, and it's like the home screen. It's sort of a sandbox, whereas the home screen is a sandbox for your guitar tone, Showcase is a sandbox for your performance, your live shows or your jam session or your rehearsal.
What did version one in your head look like of how you saw it being used? Kind of the 15 years ago version. Where did you start the germ of the idea?
Oh, okay. So I've told a few people this. I don't think like we talked about this publicly, but and I apologize if this gets lengthy. You can edit this down. But when I was in
No,
retail,
no way.
when I was in retail, I worked at a place called Rainbow Guitars in Tucson, Arizona. Awesome people. If you're ever in town, stop by and say hi. And we were sort of notorious for solving complex problems. And we would get calls from people. It's like, hey, I want to pull this off. How would you do this? I go, well, get this. We'll set it up for you. We'll actually load in like whatever software you need. We'll show you how to use this. Come in. If you buy from us, we'll give you a better deal than the big box store. We'll take care of you. Everything's great. And so people would call us. And there were a few problems that it was really difficult for us to solve. And one was anything, all of the new metal bands in the late 90s, early 2000s, they had these big kind of live performances. And every time somebody would come through town and everybody would go see the show, a bunch of kids would come in the next day and go, how do I do that live? That's awesome. And we go, well, here's what they do. Here's how you could do it. And like the simplest thing was like, I just want to run like a cool segue or intro between, the song. How do I do that? Or how do I have these drum loops playing? And the easy answer at the time was, well, you buy an iPod because iPods were relatively new at the time, and you put your music on the left, you put a click track on the right, and then you get a little Mackie mixer and you connect that and you make sure your headphones can hear both and you can use this knob to blend between the two. And they're like, okay, and that would work for everybody. And that's what everybody did. And this is pre-Ableton Live, or I think Ableton Live had just come out at the time. And so I was thinking about this, like this is a problem. There is no easy solution. There's no easy, like approachable, simple solution for these type of situations. And so I started kind of working on stuff, and I worked for Electrics. If you remember those DJ effects processor for one NAMM show. And then right after that, I got hired by Roland. So I was working in customer service at Roland. I started designing products for Roland, thinking that they would they would actually make products, or I would have some input. I had zero input on anything at Roland, which I totally get because it was just Roland US was a distributor. I think they have a lot more input now. But I built this whole line of products called Showcase. And my buddy Jason Stillwell, who I think you know, he is, interestingly enough, he's the product manager for Tone Master Pro. Good friend, awesome dude, awesome, awesome dude. He was working at Line 6 at the time. He said, hey, you should pitch the Showcase thing to Marcus Ryle. And so I'm like, Marcus Ryle he's a legend, right? He helped design the ADAT, which ushered in home recording, right? And a million other things. So I'm like, yes, please. So I had
Light
this
pipe?
what's that?
Anybody out there that has an OG Sony stereo that has that little red laser? Marcus Ryle invented that. Like the spillover from the MI space
Yeah.
is nuts. Please go ahead.
Yep. So I had this big binder that had an entire manual for one of the showcase boxes, and I had the whole line out. I had like down to the MIDI implementation was like completely mapped out, product lines, one sheets, the whole thing. And I did my pitch, and Marcus said, "This is really interesting. Can you come back?" And I came back the next week, and I came back the next week. I kept pitching it to more people. At the very end, my would-be boss, Patrick O'Connor, said, "So Eric, we got to be honest with you. We're not going to make showcase. Everybody just wanted to see what a geek you were. And so we're going to figure out how to get you here from Roland because you should be designing gear." And so that was my start at Line 6 15 years ago. And everybody I worked with, if they wanted to talk about Showcase, I would tell them about Showcase. Like, oh, you got to do this, we got to do this. And it just never happened. And then slowly I just broke people down and they just wanted me to stop talking about it. So the whole Showcase thing is 22, 23 years old.
So just for pisses and giggles, I release albums about as often as I don't know, like some strange celestial event. So the last album I released was new instrumental, came out 2008, I think. So the first tour I did was across Europe supporting Gilby Clarke with an iPod.
Yep.
And it was me. And so the funny thing is noting the The first live show had a guy running the loops from the album on Ableton Live, and that would have been 2007, 2008, when we had a full band playing that. So the funny thing is, you and I have talked loosely
Yeah.
about things here and there, but the
For
funny
years,
thing
yeah.
is, as a use case scenario, I've done all these things. You would know what an MD4 is. So the point being is I've got an
Oh yeah, I
MD4.
remember MD4. Yeah, it was a 4-track Sony mini disc player. Yep, totally
So
remember that.
that's out in offsite storage, gathering dust. But the thing about it was it wouldn't skip like a CD.
Yep.
So it had its proprietary media. So that was one of the ones the drummers liked, because when they were back there on the riser and the stuff's bouncing up and down next to them, they could control it.
Yep.
So, the funny thing is all these things. So let's go to the opposite end. As you think about today, and you think about how one of the things I was imagining is like, hey, I'm here. You got the key command that you could, the QWERTY key commands. That, by the way, I still have your Helix rack. Just let me know when you need it back. But the point being is that you can use to control stuff. So camera A, B, C. So I'm a content creator. I've got a timeline. I've got flags. And I'm just like, okay, at this point, I'm going to switch to the neck pickup. And I kind of move like that, so I know I'm tight on that shot. I've got a monitor maybe over there. So now, all of a sudden, I'm doing all this content creation around demoing a guitar in real time, being able to switch tones and doing all the stuff that you could have done in Dream Rig, but doing it in Showcase. So as you think about a modern case scenario versus kind of like what we were doing back in the dark ages within the new metal world, what do you envision as kind of some of the modern, the ones that you actually actively think, I see this and I see that? What are some of those things?
Well, tracks suck. Nobody wants to. I mean, there are bands who do tracks really, really well, but they restrict kind of the organic flow of jamming. There are all sorts of, they um you can't extend solos. You can't if you're really in the groove, you can't repeat sections. And so we've gone to great lengths to make it so not only can you sort of treat the sections of your songs as a very fluid sort of thing where you get to pick the next section that's coming up. If you want to you can reorder sections of songs on the fly, you can extend solos, you can do all sorts of really cool things. But if you don't want tracks at all, you don't need them. So there was one showcase product in that repertoire of that product line called Showcase Step. And somebody on the forums was asking for this product like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm like, what is going on? We designed a product like this 20 years ago, and all it was, instead of having any type of tracks, what you could do is you could set up a big list of events that you want to have happen, and you assign it to a marker. And then one foot switch just basically sequences through that list of things. So for when I hit this switch the first time, these things happen. When I hit it again, these things happen. I can go back and queue it up, but if I hit this, then all of these things happen. So if you're willing to actually hit one switch during a show, you could do everything but the tracks, and then you don't have to worry about anything. There's no click, there's no trying to keep up with whatever. And again, Showcase is also perfect for like a cool intro or segue, or I just want to trigger a background vocal to come in for the big choir part or whatever in this song. So it kind of just gives people the ability to augment their live performance or augment their jam session. You can use it in many, many different ways. And it's much more sophisticated and more fun and much less limiting than an iPod or any of those old solutions we had back in the day. The MD4, I totally remember. Yeah.
So when you first started teasing me about Stadium, you said this is going to be perfect for you. So the ironic thing is that I've gone from the Boss RC300 to the RC600, and they're designed such that they're actually, I use it basically like Stadium, where I basically go into Pro Tools and I create mixes where I just have a start and a stop point, so I can just have the first piece of audio is the intro. And it loops ad nauseum as I'm kind of creating the atmosphere, kind of playing soft and then building it up as I go over it. And then the next section of audio is the top of the song. And then if I want to, at the end of the song, I'll have a jam out that I just can kind of do whatever I want to do on the end. Because you only basically get 3 loops to do it with. You kind of got to figure out what you're going to do on that last piece because it's going to be the last gig. I actually had to kind of take the volume control on the unit because I was like, that's all I got.
Yep.
And there was a fade out, but the point being is that to have that type of flexibility, so the Schenker tour that I did 2009, maybe 2010 was with the RC300. And if I had had Stadium, it would have made my life so much better because again, the advantage is, we start off with an iPod, it's in your hand. The Boss stuff, it's at your feet, but you don't have the ability to set the markers like this. So the ability or flags and be able to then and this whole nonlinear editing. Is there a maximum number of flags at this point that you're going to launch with at version 1.0?
If so, QA hasn't found it yet. So we're still. I'm not saying we're early on Showcase. There's a ton of Showcase that's been working really well, but we're still kind of pushing the limits to see what we can pull off. So
awesome. And one would presume that there's some sort of file format for Showcase that you can export and exchange Showcase sessions. Is that correct? And what's the language that you use?
Audio files are just WAV files, so they're uncompressed WAV files.
But if I want to bundle my files and my markers, how do I exchange that from unit to unit?
That we can't talk about yet. We have some cool stuff happening. Yes, people will be able to bundle songs with all sorts of things.
All right, I'm not going to let you just kind of do all sorts of things. I have to go there. So all this talk about the GPU and the kind of like all sorts of things, I probably shouldn't be asking it if I need to edit this out. But video, you got a GPU on there. I mean, it's kind of obvious that there's this giant screen in the middle of this thing.
Yep.
Are you going to support video? And if I need to edit it out, I could do that. But I got to ask.
No, so admittedly, I did talk to Brandon about that a couple of years ago. I said, hey, we could get a coprocessor that adds HDMI on it. Could we have HDMI out with us? And then you just connect this directly to a projector. And Brandon looked into it. He's like, well, yeah, but that's going to take up X number of cores on some of the core processors. So it's like at that point, like we could use that for something that guitarists actually care about. So yes. So at this point, if you want to do video, you would have a laptop and you would spit out a spacebar message that would start that video, or if that video software responds to MIDI, you could do via MIDI as well. So unfortunately, no, it won't. Nexus doesn't do video. It only does audio, data, and power. So that won't work either. But there's all sorts of cool stuff we have cooking that may or may not have to do with that. That's all I can say.
And along the same lines, will you be able to display graphics like a JPEG or a GIF? Sorry, GIF. Let's just say JPEG on the interface.
Oh, so like a home screen on your phone?
Yeah.
There's some, not the whole screen necessarily, but there's some cool little customizations that we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay.
We're like the answer is going to be yes for 90% of the questions, but the answer would have been 90% yes back in 2015. So, I mean, we had a lot of stuff mapped out for years and years and years. So I just don't know when stuff is going to land. It really depends on, how people are itching for this feature or that feature. And we go to our database, we start moving things around. That's really what it is. So what's nice is that we've built a platform that lets us, yes, if it makes sense, if we have the time, if we have the resources to do these kind of things, and if enough people want this over another feature, then yeah, absolutely. We can pretty much do almost everything we want except for send video to a projector directly.
And I think we're getting close on time, so we're going to kind of start to land the plane here. Other than Showcase, what are some of the other things that you think end users are really going to connect with most on Stadium that wasn't present in Helix that you were able to roll out with Showcase? I mean, with Stadium rather.
Which is a different question than what my personal favorite feature is. Aguora, 100%. Um, it's it's pretty remarkable. It, I mean, it's tough to not be hyperbolic about it, and people won't know until they actually get to sit down and play it. But it doesn't sound like a Line 6 product at all. And there's homogenization in every modeler. There always is. We have people, I can't, but we have people in the building who can listen to something. Oh, I know exactly what company made that modeler because they're able to hear weird something. I don't know what it is. And a lot of that stuff is sort of melted away with Agora. It's a completely different approach, certainly for us. It's not HX just with more granularity. It's all right, well, let's that worked really, really well. We got amps that, at least on paper and by measurement devices and null tests and ABX listening tests, we can say, hey, we got the accuracy down, but the accuracy may not necessarily be the ultimate goal anymore. It is still a goal, but are there other problems? Are there other things that people are telling us that we need to be looking at? And so we spent a lot of time looking at things, and it required sort of a different approach to the whole thing. And Agora was birthed from that. And it's and and we have a big list of the amps that we're going to hit next, but it's really just making sure and listening to our beta testers and making sure that they're 100% happy with the 16 amps that we've chosen, and making sure that stuff is nailed down, so we now have a springboard to then get going and start cranking out other stuff.
One last question. Proxy, because I guess that's coming in
That's next.
2026. I can get that date right. We can laugh about that later.
Yeah.
So humble pie is the sweetest taste of all.
There was so much information, dog. It's impossible for anybody to get.
Crazy.
I got half of it wrong. I had a bunch of people saying, you shouldn't have said that, Eric. Why'd you say that? I'm like, I don't know. I probably shouldn't have said that, but I did.
Actually, the presentation was phenomenal. I mean, to get up there, basically, I don't know what you had in terms of your notes, but it was really, and it was at 100,000 views on a heartbeat. So just a great job. I mean, a great launch. And the vibe, as always, was great.
It was fun. I did the teleprompter, but I went off script a lot. So
we love that. So Proxy, one of the questions was, and I don't really want to kind of put you in a place where you get uncomfortable about talking about stuff that's, future casting. If you look at some of the other products out there, sometimes the amp, sometimes the cabinet, that you can get the amp and the cabinet. As I recall, you basically described it as amps, cabinets, and effects and signal chains. So can you kind of break that down as far as, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I mean, can you illuminate a little bit further on kind of how you view that ecosystem from your perspective?
Well, I can't expound on it beyond what people would normally expect from this type of technology. I'm going to be the first to admit we're not saying, oh, it's super unique and it's super special and it's going to change the world and this is better than this guy. It's not. It is definitely we have a lot of super brilliant people, and it was a big leap of faith to kind of roll our own. But it's specifically because we have plans for it that don't make sense for something like open source NAM. Um, but but credit where credit's due. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of Kemper. I mean, they did this first, and that's part of the reason I snuck in a sheep icon for the Proxy logo, because we're all sheep just following Kemper. And Christoph's a genius. He's been to the building. We've had beers with him. We love him. It kind of feels not icky, but it's like, because we kind of have to go there. And so we can't say no. We're going to keep doubling down on modeling. Modeling is still our primary focus, mainly because some of the other future stuff we have planned requires a sound source or a model source that can be easily controllable and manipulatable and dynamic, and it's a lot more difficult to do that with capture-based stuff. If you think of it, like, I've always thought of capture-based tech is kind of like a really cool multi-sampler. Like, here's a great multi-sample of a Moog synthesizer. Or if you have a model, it's the actual synthesizer, right? Or here, go start turning knobs, and now it's a completely different sound that sounded nothing, which you just can't do with a multi-sample. But with a multi-sampler, you can get any sound you can possibly capture. So you kind of have to have both, right? It's almost like the old workstations from the early 2000s where it has to have a great synth engine, but it also has to have a sampler. And then, and things change. And when we started Proxy, NAMM was definitely doing this, but we were watching it carefully, but we didn't expect it to be as big. We kind of did. We were watching it, but it became this big thing, and everybody's been embracing it. So we're not still don't know entirely where NAMM's going to land. We're not entirely sure where Proxy's going to land. We're excited with some of the initial results of where we're landing in conjunction to some other people, but um, it's just about options for everybody.
I absolutely love the idea of HX Stomp or HX Stomp XL stadium version being able to put my own. I've got a Jose modded Marshall over there.
Yep.
To be able to bring that into the Line 6 ecosystem is a big deal to me. All right, my last closing point.
Mhm.
Interblock communication for dynamic impedance speaker curves. Gosh darn it. So the short version is that back there is a Mesa Boogie cabinet, and somewhere around here there's a Mesa Boogie head. But one of the things I was messing with was just testing different reactive load systems and testing things. And so I've got a mic there, and I discovered that when, as you pointed out, there's an actual speaker connected versus a reactive load, the amp behaves differently. So interblock communication is really awesome. So that is new to Stadium. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that before we shut on out of here?
I mean, there were speaker impedance curves in Helix as well, but only in the amp, in the amp plus cab block because it's all connected, right? So, but with Stadium, there is no amp plus cab block. So there are amp blocks and there are cab blocks. And when you tap and when you create an amp block, you can choose whether you want a linked cab, and then it adds a second block that's now linked. And it doesn't just link what cab gets loaded when you turn the amp knob. So if you change the amp, the cab changes as well, just like it does on an amp plus cab block. And I think Pod Go works that way too, because you have separate amp and cab blocks there as well. But even though they're tied together, the cab block can talk back to the amp to make sure that that the power amp section of that amp loads the proper impedance curve for that cab. And there's other stuff we have planned as well, but the interblock communication also allows us to do things like side chaining the gates and compressors. So you can have a noise gate after your distortions or your amps, where you have all of this noise going in to the gate. It tends to get confused, but if you side chain it from a clean input, you get a lot in it. You know this obviously, but you can actually have a much better performing noise gate. And then the compressor works the same way too. So instead of, if you have a compressor at the very end, there's not a lot of dynamic range for it to deal with if it's post a lot of gain stages. But if you can key it off the input, which is a lot cleaner, you get better performance on your compressor as well. But then we can do dumb things like key the compressor off the kick drum, so you can do like EDM pumping, for your shows. So the side chain isn't just for inputs; it can also be used for tracks and other stuff too. So
Well,
when we're coming up with all of these things, Brandon was like, "This matrix of routing in the DSP tools is insane. What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, we did it." So
I love that. For most people have never sidechained into a compressor, but I was back in the day with a reel-to-reel Model 38 Tascam that's still upstairs. It's kind of just furniture at this point. But the idea is like I was getting rumble in the 57 from Paul muting the low end, and the amp was going, and I was like, holy cow. So I sidechained an EQ on there, boosted the frequency that was creating the rumble, and it pulled it out. And I was like, so you could do something like that if you wanted to fine tune the dynamic response of an amp model, where you're like, it kind of does that when I dig in. And you could do the same thing dynamically and get it to respond just around that little part of the frequency curve, which
yeah,
would
like
be
you,
flipping
you can key,
rad.
you can key the 3-band EQ. So I mean, there are all sorts of cool things you can pull off.
Eric, thank you so much again. First of all, the event, phenomenal. Helix, phenomenal. The vibe and the community, phenomenal. The experience, phenomenal. So, just you guys just do a great job, and you're so generous with your time. Thank you.
Nikki says hi, by the way. She says come over anytime. So
That sounds great. You better be careful.
All
All
have a
right.
place to stay. We got queen over queen bunk beds, my friend. You saw
You better be careful.
Bring it.
Everybody that's watching, thanks so much for watching. Eric Klein, Chief Product Architect and Resident Genius at Line 6. My name's Doug, in case we haven't met before. Doug Doppler. This is Doppler's Gear Garage. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Don't forget to ring the bell so we can let you know when, more cool stuff from Line 6 and so many other amazing people like Eric get a chance to share their magic here. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Thanks, Doug.